Hello, everyone. Good afternoon, good morning, good night, depending on your region you're talking about. Today, we are very happy and honored to take over with one more webinar in partnership with USP, University of São Paulo, and GLIP. So nowadays, we know that all the subjects in respect to sustainability and how we care about of Earth, it's very crucial for the next generations. Today, we're going to have the honor to have this such respectful and such great and brilliant professionals around the world with Marike Paulson, and she's going to have the opportunity to introduce herself. Gerson Damiani is our co-founder in this amazing initiative with the University of São Paulo. Don Enrique and also Sufrita talk from different perspectives in the sense of sustainability and green financing in artificial intelligence. Dispute resolution is also and conflict resolution is also one of the subject we're going to cover today. So my name is Felipe. We are with hands close hands tied with the University of São Paulo with a non-profitable organization in helping people in developing the knowledge across the world. Our main objective is to widespread knowledge from great subject matter experts and give back to the society what the most valuable, can I say, asset is the knowledge. So now I'll hand over to Gerson Damiani, one of my mentor and one of the people, the person that I respect most at the University of São Paulo, to introduce himself and also talk about GLIP in this amazing initiative. Gerson, thank you so much. I hand over to you.
Thank you very much, Felipe. It's an honor to be sharing this webinar with our friends, Marike and Marike Paulson and Enrique Garcia, for such an important topic. They will each introduce themselves, but just in sum, Marike is the Vice President for Global Affairs at the Global Institute for Peace at the University of São Paulo. Her contribution has been really relevant for this phase of globalization that the University of São Paulo has been going through, that Brazil has been going through, and the world has been going through. Enrique Garcia was a former chair of our Cátedra José Bonifácio at the University of São Paulo, with whom we had the honor to spend 1 year preparing researchers for very challenging topics, and culminated with the publication of one of the most relevant books of the collection. And so in sum, it's a great honor and pleasure at the same time to be able to share this panel with both of you. And I would like to introduce very briefly the work of our Global Institute for Peace and Conflict Resolution at the University of São Paulo, created some 7 years ago, discussing with Marike back then the needs that we had to have an institute dedicated to activities and initiatives dealing with the issues of innovation, technology, gender equilibrium, and diversity as sustainable tools to contribute to global peace. When we started this initiative, we didn't think that the topic would gain so much relevance in the realm of peace engineering. It's important to say that we are based at the School of Engineering at the University of São Paulo, and peace engineering has become a global movement, including North America, Europe, Asia, Africa, and Southeast Asia, to motivate inclusion and diversity, providing students who would otherwise not have the opportunity to study engineering, for instance, with scholarships, and also entrepreneurship towards startups, the promotion of ideas and studies and research dealing with topics like artificial intelligence, blockchain, cybersecurity, and so wide-ranging, going all the way towards indigenous communities, digital corporate responsibility, technology innovation. And right now, the topic of global sustainability and green financing is in the forefront of every discussion in any discipline you talk about. So the interdisciplinary nature of the work we do made us be able to reach out beyond the university, beyond the walls of the university to society in general. So this is the work that the Global Institute for Peace and Conflict Resolution has been doing since 2016, 2017, not only at the University of São Paulo, but also with its national and international partners. So today, our topic, which includes the ideas of sustainability, green financing, conflict resolution, we couldn't be better represented than having Marique Paulson and Henrique Garcia here with us to address some of these issues, which entail also the program of a course we'll be teaching at the University of São Paulo, a postgraduate, a graduate, as we say in Brazil, pós-graduação. It's a course in a similar format to an MBA, which starts in the second semester of 2024, and will be able to address the topics of relevance that will be handled during this course. So without any further ado, I will pass the word to Marique Paulson, and she'll be able also to introduce herself, and then we'll be going in rounds also with Henrique Garcia and Felipe and Suprita. Thank you very much for joining us today. Suprita, who works with Marique Paulson in Bahrain, and Volker Minks, who works with us here at the University of São Paulo, and counting also on the amazing leadership and vision and creativity of Felipe Dalbello, who has had the idea of putting this hub channel together. So thank you very much, Felipe. And now, Marique, please.
Thank you. Thank you, Jay. Thank you, Felipe. It's always great to do things with my Sao Paulo family. I tend to say I'm a Paulista by now. And I am always very sad when we do our webinars. We were just discussing, I can't wait to actually get back to Brazil in fall and spring. And hopefully I get to take Suprita with me, who is my partner in crime here in Bahrain. So we are based in Bahrain. I'm originally from the Netherlands. I'm a lawyer and a law professor, and specialized in international law, disputes, arbitration, and human rights. I've started my career in Europe, then about a decade in the United States, in Miami and Washington, where Suprita and I met. She was my student at the University of Miami School of Law. And I was with a firm there, a law firm, then moved to Washington, where I worked for Madeleine Albright and her commercial diplomacy firm. And now I've been in Bahrain. I've been tasked with creating the International Disputes Hub and rebooting the arbitration institutions here. So it's very exciting. It's always, I think, Jay, the universe provides for our group. The way we've met in India, now we have Suprita from India with us as part of this team. We met through Martin Hunter, as our group will remember. And then we saw each other in Sao Paulo when I had to teach international arbitration there. And we joined forces in the Global Institute for Peace Studies. And it's true that we started all those years ago. And I think what is very different from the other organizations that I've worked with is that although we focus on international law and arbitration and the related topics, we are not with the law school. We are with international relations. We are with engineering. We work with so many stakeholders in the region and beyond. We've worked with companies. We've worked with TEDx, as you will remember. And so it's always that element of cross-pollination that makes GLIP so powerful. And again, we're now at a crossroads. I would say that most leaders in the world, and whether it's the United Nations, heads of states, or chief justices, doesn't matter what arena we talk about. So, for example, my arena, international law, the leaders will say there are two topics that matter, and it's climate change and AI. Then the question is, how would artificial intelligence play a role with the future on climate change? And I think that there are two things that we talk about, right? We talk about how do we put a halt to climate change, and how do we look at sustainability on the long term? And there is the legal. In everything what we do, there is always the legal. And what I would like to point out today is that we need to accept, I think in our lifetime, we need to accept that this would probably be the year that we would come to the conclusion that international law and the rule of law has failed us. Meaning, when we look at the biggest challenges that the world community faces, it's climate change, but it's, again, certain parts of the world being in a state of war. I would definitely not even label it as war. I would call certain things that are happening a genocide, and still have leaders, governments, the United Nations, international organizations, celebrities, if you will, public figures, those on social media say that international law will fix everything, right? And so, just to give you an example, the International Court of Justice has rendered a decision with respect to Gaza. And I remember, as a specialist in international law and a professor of international law, I said that was very, very unfortunate. And that's a very unusual thing to say when the number one court in the world renders a just decision in favor of human life, that a professor would say that is very unfortunate that that decision was rendered. And I will explain to you why. And this gets me into my first topic of accountability. The fact that South Africa brought a case before the International Court of Justice for the atrocities in Gaza, the fact that the International Court of Justice rendered a decision for human life in Gaza might give the world community the false sense of justice. It might even give what we say, like a get out of jail free card to governments, to the United States, to other nations and the United Nations. It might give us this false sense of we are handling it. But the bottom line is that as we speak, it is not being handled. And the bottom line is that as we speak, hospitals and refugee camps are being attacked. And so I wish that did not happen. I wish the International Court of Justice decision was not rendered, because it's a piece of paper. And that is that accountability that I talk about. When we talk about climate change and we talk about the Paris Agreement, there are bilateral investment treaties that have social and corporate responsibility provisions. There are cases rendered and decisions rendered by international tribunals holding either governments or investors accountable for environmental damage. The Paris Agreement, in essence, is a promise and a commitment by states to do something about climate change. It's a promise by states to look at sustainability on the long term. But what I tend to say is that's a piece of paper. That's a piece of paper that was negotiated at the United Nations. And that was a promise in writing by states and by leaders. But if you would ask me, well, what came out of that promise? It is either nothing or not enough. If you look at bilateral investment treaties and the decisions rendered that relate to, let's say, environmental damage, that is accountability and damages for things that have already happened. It does nothing for climate change going forward. It does nothing for sustainability going forward. And that's that false sense of we are doing something. I would even call it window dressing. So if you are in politics, if you are in diplomacy, if you are with the leading international organizations for a term, right, a term of 4 years, a term of 8 years, you can tell your voters, you can tell those who put you into that office, look, I am being accountable. I am a leader. I am doing something about it, but it's window dressing. It's, in a sense, kicking the can down the road to, let's say, the next administration, the next Secretary General of the United Nations, et cetera, et cetera. And I would therefore say that right now, globally, geopolitically, and in the history since World War I and World War II, international law is failing us. International law gives us this false sense of accomplishment. International law is a piece of paper. It's words, sentences, provisions, treaties crafted at the United Nations. It is not addressing what is happening in real time. So Suprita will know in India right now, there are heat waves happening as we speak that are like apocalypse now, right? We have seen even over the last year, the calamities that have happened across the world, whether it's hurricanes and tornadoes and earthquake, etc. We know this is real. And this is not something for our great grandchildren. This is something for our children that's going to be a real issue of sort of livelihood for those who come after us. And it is time to accept that we can no longer trust the mechanics of international and the rule of law around the world. And that is a harsh reality. It's a harsh reality, especially because all those international mechanisms and instruments were created after World War II. And now we are in 2024, and we must realize and accept that the solutions are not there. The solutions are not there for people who are suffering the effects of climate change across the world as we speak. And so going from that kind of elephant in the room and doom and gloom little speech, I would like to get to stakeholder engagement. What we see at the level of these types of negotiations, United Nations, certain summits, World Economic Forum, IMF, you name it, leaders come together to talk about what is next and feel that, okay, we've done advocacy, we've come together at these leading summits, we have some ideas. I tend to say, if you really want to move forward, don't focus on the Paris Agreement or bilateral investment treaties that are concluded by states. Try to find a way to conclude an international instrument that is with other stakeholders, like energy, like the oil companies. The big oil companies have the resources and power to do two things. They actually are spending money on research for alternative energy sources, and they also have the power to do something about emissions in real time. So you need to have those, the representatives of big oil, at the table. You need to not work against them, as we see in bilateral investment treaties. You have to work with them. Now, we've discussed this with some other at some other platforms before. The reaction was quite hostile in that there is a perception that big oil does not want to collaborate. I think the only way to figure out is to talk to big oil, to have honest conversations, to have honest stakeholder engagement. So this is where I would say it's kind of the cross-pollination, communicating vessels, having all the voices at the table, because states alone are not going to make a difference at this point in time. And that brings me to the third point. One frustrating thing that I see in the space of politics, diplomacy, governance, and governments, so state-led efforts, is that unlike, let's say, in the private sector, it's very hard to move the needle. So when we work with governments, when we work for governments, and we want to get something done, we have big dreams, right? We have big ideas. We want to create. We want to create. Creating at the level of government is often almost impossible. So there's bureaucracy, there's a lot of red hoops, there are a lot of meetings with ministers, a lot of statements of, yes, let's do this, let's do this. The one thing that lacks is the magic word follow up. So one thing that we see at the level of governments and international organizations is that we can sit together and have lovely conversations. And we can say, let's create this hub. Let's create this mechanism. Let's work on climate change. Let's see how we can reform education. Let's see how we can unlock human potential. Let's see how we can move the needle for women empowerment. That's an idea. Those are dreams. And those dreams are then parked on a shelf. And they drown in the red hoops. They drown in meetings. They drown in rules. And there is no real follow-up. So if we really want to have an honest conversation about climate change, and we want to have an effective conversation about sustainability, and we want to prove to our children that we're actually doing something, it's a matter of getting these ideas and these statements and that type of advocacy from a shelf into something concrete, and to develop a roadmap that will lead to something that, as I say, you can touch. So where we need to get the adults in the room and the leaders is, okay, we need to do something about climate change. We need to work on sustainability. We need to hold states or investors accountable. We need to come with deliverables so that we put a halt to climate change as much as we can. We need to work on deliverables so we have alternative energy sources. We need to work on deliverables so that we have sustainable methodology that can be put into action. you're saying we need to have something we can touch. We need to have something that ultimately I can see in my living room. So it has to go from a conversation at the United Nations to me as an individual leading a life that is more sustainable. Me as an individual having access to things that allow me to be protected against climate change. Me as an individual being part of a community and living in a country that has actually implemented all those sustainable goals. And that's the challenge. That is the challenge. How do you create a roadmap that goes from paper to something you can touch? Now, I put these things out there. I don't have the solutions yet. I have learned that the magic is follow up. I have learned that the magic is being extremely practical. And I've learned that you have to have all the stakeholders at the table. And I have learned that you just shouldn't give up. Don't look at this as your job. Don't look at this as I am a professor, I am a head of state, I am a minister, I'm an official at the United Nations, I'm with IMF, I'm with the World Bank, but I go home at the end of the day. So whether at the end of the day I succeed or not, well, it's just my job. It is very important that those who have real powers, United Nations, governments, World Economic Forum, Club de Madrid, IMF, understand you're not going to go to bed tonight. You have to fix this because your children and your grandchildren are depending on you, the grown-ups in the room. So it has to become not even a calling. We all have to have a sense that this is our obligation. And it's a 24/7 one because that's how dire the situation is. So that's my little doom and gloom speech and instructions. I hope this can be the start of real conversations that will lead to something that can be implemented. Voilà. Thank you.
Thank you very much, Marike. Now we will hear from Henrique Garcia, our associate professor here at the University of São Paulo, who will introduce himself. It's the idea, his speech right now will be on mega trends, starting with the mega trends in the pleasant global scenario, and then he'll move into environmental sustainability in the context of a holistic long-term development strategy. And finally, he will also address the role of multilateral banks in financing environmental sustainability. Being the former president of the Latin America Development Bank, I think for many decades, I think very few people in the world are in a better position to address these three topics. Don Henrique, por favor.
You are on, Don Enrique está en el mudo, on mute. I think your mic is on mute. En la pantalla se encuentra un botoncito
Okay,
que...
now it's working. Well,
Yes,
thank
go
you
ahead.
very much, Jay, and it's a great pleasure to be in this webinar, and especially dealing with a very important topic nowadays, which is environmental sustainability, which is a critical thing. And the basic approach I'm going to take in my presentation is that we should analyze this issue, not only looking at sustainability, environment, green finance, separated from a broader, more holistic view. And that's the reason why I will start by saying that we are living in a new age. Yeah, I started at the beginning of the second decade of this millennium, and we have some issues that we have to have them in mind. First, the fourth industrial revolution, digitalization. And now we're moving so fast with artificial intelligence and the implications it has all over. Second, of course, the impact that we had with COVID-19 and the implications in the macrosphere and in several countries of the world. Third, urbanization. We have now a global urban world. That's a very, very crucial element. Now, it's very sad, the tensions that do exist, geopolitical tensions and conflicts. In particular, in the last 2 years or 3 years, we have seen so sad things, what is happening in Ukraine, Russia, and Gaza, and so forth. This is very sad. And what is very worrisome is that the gaps, economic and social gaps between regions, within regions and within countries are expanding. Okay, and of course, warming, climate warming, a very serious thing, deforestation, all those elements. And on the institutional base, we see a deterioration of democratic institution, and very sad to say, also a weakening of multilateralism. I have lived all my career, I have been in a multilateral world, basically, with the exception of a few years that I was minister head of the economic and social cabinet of my country, Bolivia. But I spent 18 years in the Inter-American Development Bank. And as Jay said, I was president and CEO of CAF Development Bank of Latin America for 26 years, plus connections with the World Bank, with IFC, Asian Development, and all these things. And so I'm very concerned about the financing, and not only the financing, but the role of these institutions in development. And of course, in the case of the specific, in the world in general, but Latin America in particular, the fragmentation of the regional integration schemes. We see the weakening of things that were so great some decades ago, the European Union, in the case of Latin America, Mercosur, Andean Community, UNASUR, all of those things are in a very difficult moment. And of course, the issues of corruption, narco traffic, and crime worldwide. So this is the general framework. But now, a brief comment, where is Latin America? Because my interest in Latin America. Bad news. Latin America has lost relevance worldwide compared to what it was 40 years or 50 years ago. I just want to illustrate. In the early 60s, to be more precise, in 1966, GNP per capita of Latin America was 4 times larger than GDP per capita of Korea, South Korea. Today, it's the reverse. Second, in trade, Latin America at the beginning of the 60s represented 14% of trade worldwide. Today represents 5%. And the other thing, and that's the thing I don't like at all, is equity, social equity. In Latin America has, unfortunately, a Gini coefficient that shows that it's the region, unfortunately, with the worst distribution of income. Of course, there were improvements in poverty, but not sufficient. And taking into account the central theme of this webinar, the fact that Latin America is so rich in natural resources, the Amazon, and all the things that we have there, we have to be very careful in terms of identifying the priorities and taking care of this element, because the responsibility goes beyond our region. It's a responsibility with the rest of the world. Now, why is that Latin America has lost the importance? And let me mention 4 things. The first thing is that thanks to what God gave us, natural resources, we have not changed fundamentally from the traditional model of comparative advantage, which implies that we have raw materials, and when the prices are up, well, we export and we are happy, we enjoy life, so forth, and then comes. So that's a central issue. Second thing, which is a very important thing, is we don't have a long-term vision. Many other regions are in the same position, but what does it mean? That because of the changes in government, every time a new government comes, they come with a new idea. They don't have continuity in terms of defining a long-term strategy. And for instance, if you compare to emerging Asia, you see that they have that. And of course, when I make a conference and I say this, I say that what this happens in China, this happens in Singapore, and this, that, but they could say, okay, but they don't have a democratic government. So the challenge is in democracy, how do you avoid to to be changing every 4, 5, 6 years? And of course, polarization is another thing where one the extremes are fighting too much. That happens not only at the global sphere, China, United States, and here Russia, and here, and in Latin America, the groups, the right of the left. So, in that framework, it's very important to recognize that if we want to move ahead, and more specifically in the issues that are central to Marek and Jay are so experienced, we have to look at the whole picture. And I always use the example of the objectives 2030. If you look at that, they are very, very important. You have eliminate poverty, hunger, these are all the objectives. But is there a sentence in which they say where are the resources? Where the resources, the money will come? What are the institutions? No. So the central thing that I've been fighting for, and precisely during my tenure at the USP, the book that we generated was the urgency that was for Latin America, but it's in general of adopting long-term vision with a holistic approach. And what do I mean by that? Well, I have what I call 4 E's. First condition is macroeconomic equilibrium. Equilibrium, it means if you don't have that, temporarily you can have high deficit, this and that, but you cannot have that on a permanent basis. But that's not sufficient. You can be a very stable economy, but what is the impact? Or the other efficiency, economic, productivity, competitiveness, the conditions of employment, so forth. But that's not sufficient. The other is social equity and inclusion. If you have good rates of growth, but growth is concentrated, well, that's terrible. And finally, is the topic of environmental equilibrium stability. So that the central thing is that whenever you treat any of these things, you have to look at the whole picture. In my experience of being in meetings with heads of state, with ministers of this and that, it's very interesting. When the ministers of economy or finance meet, they are so happy to discuss about the deficit, fiscal deficit, the exchange rate, this and that. But do they really discuss the implications in the other is? No. When you have the people in the social sectors, we're talking about poverty and this and that and inequity. Do they relate with the condition? No. And the environment, the same thing. So the first big conclusion is we have to stimulate a holistic view at the national, regional level, so that in dealing specifically, of course, with the issues of poverty, of environment, and so forth, we have to go to all these things, but we have to relate that to the other points. No, and what are things that we have to work very, very hard? One is productive transformation. In other words, we have to move in our countries from the traditional comparative advantage model that I mentioned, that is based on the richness that we have, the natural resources and export, raw materials basically, to competitive advantage, which means that we have to have technology, innovation, and move in that direction. Because if we don't do that, we are going to have a tough time in being competitive enough to be able to have rates of growth that would be sufficient to precisely go to the issue of poverty and inequity and environmental sustainability. Now, one thing that is clear in many developing countries, in Latin America specifically, the capacity, the savings ratio of the countries is relatively low. It means, what is the savings ratio? The savings ratio is what the governments don't spend. In other words, if they have a fiscal positive situation on a regular basis, okay. But also it's the savings of enterprises, public enterprises and private enterprises, and also the savings of the families. The total of that in Latin America, in terms of the GDP, represents on an average 18%. And to have a rate of growth that will be satisfactory to close the gaps, you have to invest at least 25, 26%. So what do? You have to either save more or save more and get external resources, create the conditions to get the resources where from the institutions, and I'll make comments on that in the future. Then going more specifically to priorities, and the priorities, of course, in sectors, infrastructure, but sustainable infrastructure. You have to do things in a way that you look at the whole things. Many times in the capacity of head of a multilateral development bank, the president said, for instance, "Oh, we want to finance in this road, marvelous road." And the question I make, well, you have the feasibility studies. Well, yes, the feasibility studies implies technical, economic, financial, social, and the environmental impact. And normally many presidents say, "Oh, you guys in the international development banks, you are too bureaucratic, you ask those questions. Environment, we can deal with it later." No, you have to deal that at the early stage pre-feasibility study, and then decide whether to move or not, and then go with the science and the other things. But many countries are not doing that. And especially, we have to be very careful in the case of South America with the Amazon, with what implies to have, roads that are built out without having very, very careful attention in the impact of the environment, and making all the corrections necessary to proceed in that direction. Okay, now the other thing is education, but it's education of the 21st century. We are very happy because we have brilliant lawyers, economists like me, whatever, but the new world needs other things. It needs people with technology, capacity, digitalization, and many of the universities and the schools don't deal too much with that. So, not only what you learn in the university or in the school, permanent upgrading. The companies and everybody should move in that direction. So, having said that, now going to the area, I think, of the transition in energy. You have to prepare to that transition and to move into areas of circular economy, which is very, very important, decarbonization strategies, and of course, to transit to renewable sources, solar, wind, hydropower, and so forth, and deforestation. That's a very tragic thing. So, having said that, I think that very important that the role of multilateral institutions like the World Bank, the IDB, CAF, so forth, is not only the fact that they provide financing, it's the fact that they require certain things that are fundamental to move. And that's the quality of the studies and the quality independent procurement of goods and services. Not to say, "Oh, I want to do this road." Well, no. International bidding and all those things. And because of that, the IDB, the World Bank, African Development Bank, so forth, not only are relevant because of the money they put, they're relevant for the catalytic role. The fact that they are there attracts resources from bilateral banks, and also from the capital markets. And that's a very important thing. And it doesn't stop with the financing. It's follow-up, maintenance, supervision. And at the end of the day, 15 years later, you make an ex post evaluation to see whether the results you expected have been complied with, and on the basis have new lessons. So I believe that in the discussion of this crucial and fundamental thing, we have to work with that approach. Let's not get only in the topic. Of course, like the great philosopher, if you are familiar with it, the best philosopher in the world was a Mexican. You know who? Cantinflas. You know who Cantinflas was? This was Cantinflas, the famous humor guy. And there was one movie, The Devil is in the Details. And that's correct. You can have very nice ideas, wishful thinking here and there. But if you want to comply and get results, you have to go to the details. And for that, the pillar, fundamental pillar, institutions, 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 clear rules of the game, policies and procedures, and the capacity to attract foreign resources and foreign investment. And some of the presidents that didn't like too much foreign investment, I had a discussion with, I won't say what president, but I said, why is that your government doesn't like so much foreign investment? No, they take the money away. Oh, hold a second. You know which country is the country in the world that has been more successful in attracting foreign investment? You know what? China. What countries in the world were the main investors in China? USA first, European Union two, and the third one, Australia. And what did they invest in? They invested in technology, innovation, and that's what built it. So I leave these messages for a discussion. And of course, in the university, in the future courses, I think we have to emphasize this need of a very integral approach. So I stop here.
Excellent, excellent, Doctor. Mr. Garcia, thank you for insightful. And I'm sorry for not giving all the compliments to Marique for your eye-open overview. I was kind of blowing my mind with such insightful and overview from the international law perspective. And additionally, Sr. Garcia giving us how can I say, an MBA class with Marique in terms of green finance, but also the holistic view of the business and geopolitical scenario. Now I'll turn, so stick with us. If you want to grab a glass of water, we are turned now to Gerson Damiani, and we'll keep him discussing not only aspects in terms of sustainability itself and green finance, but so with the 17 ODS, Objective Development, Sustainable Development Objectives from United Nations. So Gerson, among all the projects you have been conducting and planning in the fields of education, law, international law, conflict resolution, and social inclusion, can you give us an overview and a snapshot from what we are not only developing, but so about your experiencing around the world?
Thank you, Felipe. Also following on the last two speeches by Marique and Garcia, I would like to put the fundamental role of education as a piece of this change process that we're looking into. So to put that in perspective, I would like to talk, I normally like to put that through a triple helix perspective. Triple helix is a methodology that's being used for decades right now, and I'll tell you why I like it. I mean, if you observe it, let's put it like as a triangle, right? And in this triangle, we think about state and governments as one actor, and then we think about the private sector as another actor, and then we think about the university as a third actor, all combined thinking about solutions, thinking about empirical possibilities to implement change. So as a representative of the university, but also have been in the past involved with the private sector and also with governments in my professional experience, but now particularly from a university perspective, I think it's really important to think about how we interface, how does sustainability interface with a constantly evolving world and global order, because it just seems like it was a few years ago that I was on the top of the Berlin Wall as it was falling. And 6 months prior to that, we were thinking about, oh, so what is the status quo going to be in the future? And some of my East German and West German friends, they used to say, colleagues, used to say, oh, not much is going to change. Well, I have news for you. It's changed a lot. And this global order keeps changing and keeps changing. And we have to be prepared for that. And how to best be prepared for that, if not through universities and educational institutions being involved and doing research with applied metrics. I think that metrics is something that we cannot forget. I mean, it's not only a matter of opinion, but it's a matter of looking through science and implementing change through measurement. So where is change necessary and how can it be implemented? So metrics is fundamental for that. So that's why I think that the triple helix perspective, the triple helix viewpoint, understanding what is the role of state and what is the role of private sector. So for instance, the private sector gives us all the materials, the empirical materials of what can be done and how it can be done. And the state can give, the role of the state can be through tax incentives, or bringing actors together. And the university is to research the best way of implementing those needs with the incentives that have been provided. So the complementation of this three spheres are really what we have in mind right now to make sure that we're not only talking about what's happening, but also about and what needs to be done, but how to effectively do it, right? So how can actors, and here talking about governments, corporations, international organizations, and civil society, share the vision of a new era and also simultaneously implement effective measures to achieve some of these common goals? Because when we talk about sustainability, we all have to agree that the goals, I mean, we want the forest to be intact. We want the environment for future generations, for us and for future generations to be protected. We desire diversity, we desire gender equilibrium, we desire social inclusion, but that's more than a desire. We need to implement change. And for that, I think that I will talk about it a little bit more. I hope we have time. We'll find time for that. How the course that we're planning for the second semester, how we're thinking about bringing some of these issues together in a way that we can give you like the pillars of what we're talking, and also the tools to achieve the goals that we desire. So now, if I can bring it back to Marika so we can keep this discussion, this exchange of ideas going, I think that Marika is also someone who is very much, as Don Henrique just mentioned, that institutions. Marika also with a viewpoint of governance, governance and institutions walk hand in hand, and stakeholder engagement. How do you foresee, we were talking, Marika, we're talking about charting a roadmap. I mean, you mentioned it previously. Can you give us an idea how, what it would look like? What would this roadmap look like? How we could foresee implementing it?
So I think two things that I've learned when you negotiate treaties or multilateral treaties or treaties that need to lead to something concrete. So something that is tangible, something you can touch, is follow-up is something where I observe it's lacking. So even if you've signed a treaty, or even to get to a point of signing a treaty, it really takes certain people who are just not going to let go. After a treaty is signed, there is a matter of implementing the treaty. That again takes people who are not willing to let go, and they follow up. And I think when it comes to that type of mindset, so for example, we have the Singapore Mediation Convention, just a random example, it's a multilateral treaty. The negotiations is one thing, right? Then it's signed. And what we see with governments and the United Nations is they think that's the victory. We signed this treaty. This is such a big success. Now, what somebody we worked with said, the Chief Justice of Singapore, that's just lighting a fuse. That is where the dance starts. That is where the hard work begins. And what we see with international organizations and governments is it's where they stop. So the Singapore Convention does have states who have signed and ratified the convention, but there are no mediations. There are no mediators. There are no countries who are willing to have their disputes mediated. That takes a team of people who are going to say, we're going to do roadshows, we're going to do meetings, we're going to do stakeholder engagement. And even after we've had those meetings, we're going to meet with investors, we're going to meet with the users, and then we're going to follow up. So we need to understand what are the actual deliverables. So when we talk about roadmap, so let's say we're going to say about sustainability, we're going to talk to all the stakeholders, and now we have the next 10 resolutions, right, that we're going to draft. So we draft 10 resolutions. That might be your roadmap. It's not. It's the starting point of a roadmap to say, with the following states, the following organizations, the following representatives of energy, we want to have the following 10 deliverables, resolutions, promises, etc. That's where the dance starts. So then you have to have a team of people who are going to put daily energy into liaising with all those players and follow up. Like, I think the one word I said more than any other word over the last 10 months is follow up. And Suprita will know, what does that translate into? Chasing people to commit to what they promised, chasing governments to commit to what they promised. So the roadmap has to be a timeline. The roadmap has to be very precise. The roadmap has to be, if we want to have the following conversations with big oil, to think about how can they channel resources to research into alternative sources. You have to get concrete. You have to say, okay, that sounds really good and abstract, but what does that really mean in real time? What are the details? What is the action plan? Once you have that action plan, which could be, well, we have to have the next couple of 10 meetings and travel to meet with the following people, to understand the following, to do phase 1 research, to map everything out. Okay, now we know what we have. Now we know what we need. We have the following meetings with, let's say, representative of big oil. Then the second part is, what is the follow-up? How do we make sure that we get to that real accountability? How do we make sure that, let's say, a big oil company will say, okay, we're actually putting the money down. We're doing the research, and this will lead to the following alternative energy source that can be used by people. And that requires detailed planning, that requires practical thinking, and it really requires endless energy to follow up with those who need to follow up. So this sounds very simple, what I just sketched, but we've experienced in practice that it takes a lot of energy. And what, no pun intended, but and what then happens with people in government, in diplomacy, in politics, and international organizations, at some point you get kind of like worn down. You give up. You get the sense of, it's just not going to happen. I'm sick and tired of following up. Am I the only one doing this? Am I the only one chasing these deliverables? And that's where you have to have really good teams in place, that you keep on motivating each other to say, at some point we will get to that finish line. So a roadmap will work if you find the right people with the right mindset who have an almost unhealthy level of energy to take follow-up to the next sacred level, is how I would describe it.
Excellent.
Thank you very much, Marike. Following up on that, Don Henrique, how do you see the role of multilateral banks in financing environmental sustainability these days? This is a new role for for multilateral banks, right? You are mute.
Let me tell you that many years ago we started the institution to give a special priority to this topic. Even I'll tell you a story. When in the early years of my tenure as president of CAF, I decided there were two pillars for the institution. One is regional integration and sustainable development. So it was there. But what is good is that now there's more emphasis on that in all the institutions. And they have, as I said before, they have resources, but also the technical capacity to support countries and to be catalysts to attract other players. And it should be emphasized that's a very, very important point. So I'm I'm optimistic. In the case of Kauf, my successor today, he is putting top priority to green finance and to environmental sustainability. And I think it's a very good idea.
Great. Jefferson, I think it's also, if you guys allow me to add, in addition to Enrique and Marique, considering all the context, the shifting landscape of education, digital transformation, and exponential technology, I would invite to Suprita. Correct, Suprita? Did I pronounce correctly?
That's right.
So,
Representing the new, not new, but
very good.
the future generation. Give us some insights from your perspective as a subject of matter in your field. You are based in Bahrain, right? Bahrain?
Thank you, Felipe. Yes, I'm in Bahrain with Marika, and special thanks to Marika for looping me in here. Marika has been a professor, a mentor, a friend, almost family now. So thank you very much for introducing me to your extended family and the platform to share the few thoughts that I have. Um, so right now, the magic words of our current time has been digitalization and decarbonization. So I'm going to try and share my thoughts to both of these points. Um, First, with AI. What has happened with AI is that we have technologists who've been working in their silos and they've developed products, ideas, innovative, transformational breakthroughs, and they've been working at an exponential pace. And we have policymakers who are playing catch up along the way. Now, the potential for AI to intersect with sustainability is huge. But we don't want to get caught up with overregulation and stunting innovation. So, echoing both Jay and Marika's points about stakeholder engagement, it's interesting that earlier this year in March, the UN General Assembly came out with a resolution which also spoke about stakeholder engagement and the need to engage with government, with private corporations, with non-government, civic society, with research and academia. And I think all of this fits very neatly with Jay's triple helix. And I think another interesting aspect is we need to see where we house this stakeholder engagement. And I think it's very important to take Marika's points into consideration that if we get stuck in an institution like the UN, maybe it could not be the right spot for all of the innovative thought labs to sit at. At the same time, we do need participants. We need all of the stakeholders to buy in, and we need a system of accountability. Again, a pill to swallow is about international law, and Marika's statements again there about how international law might not have the teeth that we might need today. A second point, again, going to both digitalization and decarbonization, is about thought leadership and action. First, we need thought leadership that listens, leadership that actually listens in a system of inclusivity, and action that's responsive to what's being spoken and what's being heard. Just a side here, I spent some time in the Himalayas where I was working at the ground in this region of the mountains called Ladakh, which is a very fragile ecosystem. It is a cold desert. It is isolated almost. In the winter, the roads are cut off. So it was a beautiful, serene village here. I spent a couple of months living with the locals there and trying to pitch in and just figure life out outside the grid. And while I was there, it was very interesting because this community is a zero waste community. They literally recycle or compost everything. And unfortunately, modern life is seeped in through the two roads that I mentioned. And they were stuck with the question of what to do with plastic bottles and with sanitary waste. When I tried to engage with the community, they were like, we don't want to be left behind. With the plastic bottles, the tourists bring it in. It's convenient for them. Fine. All right. What about the sanitary waste then? No tourist is bringing in 400 used diapers to throw on top of a mountain pass. So that's coming in from the local community, right? So speaking with them, they're like, why should we be left behind? We want the comfort and convenience too. And here's where our government needs to listen to us, give us incinerators, teach us how to dispose of this waste, teach us how to recycle. And I think that's one place where it's a tiny part of the world, this little village, and which was lacking both a responsive leadership as well as an action. And that just goes to think about if this is happening in this little part, which is truly heartbreaking, because you are feeding these majestic mountains trash. You are digging landfills and you are feeding the mountain trash. And and we talk about these mountains and all their glory, and so it's a little sad. So those were two thoughts that I had, and I just sort of want to say, one, sustainability and AI should be seen as an opportunity and most likely as the future, and it is not a trend. And two, it's easy to despair. It's easy to, run away from this. It's easy to hide thinking you can't make a difference. But I think it's important to be tirelessly motivated. Thank you.
Fantastic. Gerson? She ended up, you are on mute. You are on mute, my friend. She ended up answering one of my questions. Was keeping mine in the lead. I was keeping the lead. She ended up covering everything, especially artificial intelligence, the subject of matter of my PhD. But anyway, Suprita, we got a lot to talk. I'll hand over to Gerson, and we are very close. Just a very quick reminder: we are very close to wrap up. And before we go to the final consideration, Gerson, if you allow me, okay? I would like also, and for the Q questions and answers for sure, would like to not introduce only, but invite as a partner of our project, Arthur Galamba. Arthur, with a British accent. Open up your microphone, please. Arthur is also is a partner of ours in this project. I got the blessing, also Gerson, if you allow me to talk by my feelings and perception, but also conclusions. Arthur is a great partner talking from King's College. He'll introduce himself very quickly, but also tell about his brilliant platform in conjunction to digital transformation and education. He's talking from London. He's supporting this project, and he's introduced very quickly himself and gives some insight as well. And then we hand over to Gerson for our final consideration, question and answer. I'll hand over to you, Arthur. Thank you for our presence.
Thank you, Philippe. Thank you, everyone. Oh, it's a pleasure to be here with all of you. I apologize for not being able to be here earlier, actually, but I loved listening to you, Jason, Marike, Donahiken, and Suprita, and you, Philippe, as well. Thank you for having me. I have great interest in sustainability education and education for environmental justice as well. I would like to perhaps have other opportunities, Philippe, to say more about what we have been doing in relation to sustainability education at King's, and also about my work on digital education. I will share the link to GoogleMeet to those who wanted to find out more about what we do. I mean, we have been working on using digital platforms such as GoogleMeet to support, not only school pupils, higher education students, but really the lay people, like people who want to find out more about what does it mean being educated to behave in a way that is sustainable, that collaborate with reducing the emissions of carbon, like one of the main goals, that if everyone could contribute to that, obviously the impact would be greater, but also to become more critical citizens, as in to engage with a discussion with main stakeholders, government, universities, the media, etc., in an informed way. And to do that, it's not just by coming across what the media talks about, the issues with global warming, but also to have discussions with a wider public focused on that. So this is what my work is partially related to. I have a couple of publications on that myself, on transforming education for just transition. It's part of what I do, but I also mainly focused on how digital technology can support us to increase the impact of education in people's lives, in people's everyday habits. Okay, so thank you, Felipe, very much for having me, and I will hand that back over to you.
Thank you so much. Very quick reminder. So we are about to close, and then we hand over to Gerson. Gerson, please feel free for your final consideration with our honored guests, and for question and answer in case you guys want to share and ask any other questions. Thank you, Arthur.
Thank you. All right. I think it's always very positive if we're talking about change, changing through empirical examples here. We're talking about how to implement change, and then we start hearing examples. That shows how committed we are to what we're saying, and not only sharing ideas and theory. So I was very happy to hear the empirical examples of this zero-sum community that Suprita mentioned in the Himalayas. We also had with Marika. Marika worked and represented us through the University of Sao Paulo. This is around the time when Don Henrique was involved with us on the presentation of UN Women. UN Women named the University of Sao Paulo as a receiver of one of their top awards for the Impact 10 by 10 by 10, meaning the 10 countries, 10 corporations, and 10 universities in the world that had the highest contribution for gender equilibrium. And through that, we started saying, as Don Henrique said, institutions, the work of those institutions and the empirical work we did with those institutions, we can see change at the University of Sao Paulo and the work that we have been doing here. USP driving change, for instance, for indigenous communities, motivating the inclusion of women in STEM activities, among many other activities that we have had over the last few years. I would like to talk a little bit about, before I pass over the word to Marika and Don Henrique for their final statements and conclusive ideas. The course that we are offering in the following semester is based upon 4 different pillars that will be presented and analyzed throughout the course. So the interaction between environmental sustainability, economic growth, social inclusion, and equity, followed by conceptual and methodological paths. So the role of multilateral banks, financial intermediaries, and capital markets, and also the engagement with stakeholders. So here we'll be talking about sustainability, initially not only giving concepts and methodology, but also through ESG metrics applied to industry trends and practical applications. For instance, case studies of green hydrogen, entrepreneurship and startups, and corporate social responsibility, also culminating with COP30, which is one of the big initiatives that we are getting ready for in 2025. And then from the perspective of Don Henrique, we'll be talking about going beyond the Agenda 2030 and the importance of adopting a comprehensive, holistic strategy. This is something that Don Henrique really emphasizes. And finally, green financing, the role of multilateral development institutions and international capital markets. And last but certainly not least, Marika talking about multilateral collaboration and the engagement with stakeholders and enforcement possibilities to mitigate climate change, for instance. So just to let you know, I'm giving you the roadmap of our course. This is patented. I'm just kidding. Education is a shared effort, and we're happy to share this effort with everyone who wants to be part of our community. And just before I bring the word to Marika and Don Henrique, I would like to give Volker Minks the opportunity. He's also a researcher with our group to, speak for a minute or so, and then we move on to Don Henrique and to Marika and Don Henrique for conclusive statements.
Thank you very much, Gerson, and thank you very much for your outstanding comments and speeches. While you covered all the subjects what are so important, what we discussed, what we see, what functional and what dysfunctional in the world development. We see our leaders develop going back to more war, going back to less care about environmental factors, and how Marike said that we have all the institutions, we have all the connection between them, we have a globalized world, but we cannot get out of this conflicts. We create more conflicts worldwide. We have many regions in the world where we have more war than 30 years ago. So if we think about the 80s, in the end of the 80s, there was hope. There was a lot of development, conversation, global development in the direction of peace. We had falling down the wall in Berlin, and also in many other dictators were not anymore happen. So free elections, everything that came in the 80s with globalization and open up. And our new development now with all these wars, Germany spends now in the next months 8.5 billion euros for new weapons. But they say for the population, we don't have money for education, for environmental development, and we started to thinking more about the environment, to doing a bioeconomy. What are environmental factors have a bigger part of our thinking and also of economically development, educational. So education is a point that's very important, like Enrique said, and also Subrita was very about recycling systems and cycles for production and reuse of resources. Resource protection is very important for the new generation. What we can offer the new generation if we destroy everything, like this deforestation, about climate change. We think about, we're doing a lot of conferences and talk, but we don't implement that. So we have to educate our future generation of all these points, what we have discussed here or mentioned. And what Artu says, I saw his platform of education and new contents about building knowledge, this environmental factors. That's very important. I also teach a course at Humboldt University in Berlin about green development, green cities, urban agriculture, insight from cities, developing cities. Our big problems are these bigger cities with vertical vertical development, near and dense, and our life getting not better. So we have to teach all kinds of new students of parts of education programs with environmental factors. Is it their lawyers? Is it their economists? Is their bankers? They have to make courses about environment and how we adapt to climate change and how we can involve new technologies, what we have already, but they have to be implemented. Also, thank you very much for your very good speeches, and I get a lot of inspiration of it. Thank you.
Amazing, amazing. So, Gerson, I think we can move to Enrique and Marike. Final considerations. What do you think? Is that okay?
Okay. Well, thank you very much. I think all the important things have been said. So I simply congratulate the fact that this is a very important input for education. I think talking about the course that Gerson has mentioned to try to emphasize the fact of the importance of sustainability in the context of the world today is a very crucial element. And so I look forward for the course and to have this a beneficial approach. As congratulations to USP for moving in the right direction. So thank you. A pleasure to have been in this meeting.
Thank you, Enrique. Maverick, all yours.
I think we talked about Vision 2030 here in Bahrain. We're already on Vision 2050. Listening to today's contributions, about it again. I think we need three. One is a very healthy sense of realism. Two is a unhealthy amount of stubbornism. And three, I love what Sabrina said, which we have to be tirelessly motivated. There is no ceiling to how motivated we need to be today and tomorrow. That's a command. It's not a job right now. It's not a calling. It's not a passion. It's a responsibility of all individuals who have a voice at the table. And I think during our course, we can maybe discuss and give all the ingredients and tools to enable students to figure this out. But I think the course is also a very good platform, as I've done many, many times in the University of Miami School of Law, where you've been, Jay, with Martin Hunter, is to, and Sabrina knows this, having been my student, to actually work on a roadmap with students and to then take that roadmap in class and make some suggestions on how you make it real. Because students, what I've seen over all those years of teaching is that they've taught me. And that's always gives us hope and inspires us. And as always, Jay and Don Enrique, it's a pleasure to be with you virtually. It's inspiring and it's uplifting and energizing. Thank you.
Thank you very much, Marike, Don Enrique, Felipe, Arthur, Volker, Suprita, everyone who is here. I feel excited that we have representatives from Bahrain, we have Germany, we have London, we have, Don Enrique now in Vienna, but from Bolivia and India. It's very exciting to see the opportunities that we have, and we still have like another 5 minutes or so. I'd like to see if anybody would like to ask question or make a final comment too.
We do have, Master. We do have a question, but go ahead. I don't want to interrupt you. I think Flavia addressed some questions. And
yes,
go
please.
ahead yourself. Go ahead. In the chat. I think she left.
Left a question in the chat. Sustainable investments have great potential to promote and finance green transformation, like science-based targets. We need to continue supporting initiatives that bring greater awareness of the importance of preserving and regenerating natural resources while creating a better world for all of us who live in it now and for generations to come. Thank you all. Okay, thank you too. Anybody else? Any further comments?
Everybody is welcome.
Okay, so we're going to leave this available at the website of GLIP, at the University of São Paulo. We'll put this in our YouTube channel as well. and soon we'll be making an announcement about the dates and content of our upcoming course on sustainability and green financing. And please spread the word and join us. It's a great pleasure to be with you here today. And thank you very much, Felipe, for letting us use your hub channel to
Our
bring this
channel.
information forward.
Everybody's channel. Thank you as well for your time, for your efforts, for insightful comments, and see you next opportunity. Okay? So smiling, lachen or lachen. Okay, all right.
Thank you, Felipe.
Nos vemos, estimado. Ha sido un gusto, ¿eh?
Un gusto. Bye,
Thank you
Maria.
very much.
Thank you, everybody.
Thank you, everybody.
Beijos.
Thank
Ciao,
you.
ciao.
Obrigado.
Thank you.
Bye, everyone.
Ciao a tutti. Presto. Ciao.
And good, Marik. Goodbye. Thank you.
Thank you.
Bye.